Hey, welcome to Apthropology, the podcast where we chat with the people behind awesome mobile apps. We'll look to understand the biggest lessons for bringing value to people, and we'll dive into interesting stories and insights about how they build and who they build for. I am your host, Jim Lorraine, Head of Growth at AMP.
And I'm Paul Meinshausen, a co-founder and CEO of AMP.
Today we're joined by Ben Tengelsen, the VP of Data Science at IntelyCare. So welcome, Ben.
Glad to be here. Thank you both.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks for joining us. So Ben, for those listeners who don't have background, because most people would not unless they're in a very specific niche, can you tell us what is IntelyCare?
Yeah, IntelyCare is the niche inside of a niche. But yes, we're an app that is a marketplace for nursing homes and last minute shifts that need filling and nurses that want to fill last minute shifts. So you could call us like an Uber for nurses is, I don't know, a very simple description, but it's nursing homes specifically, and then nursing or nursing assistants that we're bringing together.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting that nurses, like nursing homes, I assume they just had one staff of nurses, not that you could go between different nursing homes and things.
Yeah, it's actually pretty varied, and there are some nursing homes that are owned by like a larger parent company and staff can move between facilities. It's good for patients to have the same nurses in the building every day, but there's just generally not enough nurses in the country to allow that to happen really easily. And so there's always like, I don't know, if somebody's sick or somebody goes on vacation or somebody leaves and you're just down a nurse, or if you suddenly have an influx of patients and you need more nurses than you had previously, there needs to be some kind of flexible buffer that allows facilities to have adequate staffing. And you're legally required in many places to have adequate staffing. It's not like you can just kind of, water down the soup and let nurses just like take on more and more patients. There's like serious risks and problems when that happens.
That makes sense. It's a very precious resource. So you kind of hinted at it earlier. You said IntelyCare is like the Uber for nursing, if you will. So how would you say that your marketplace is different than a conventional e-commerce marketplace or like a gig marketplace like Uber?
Yeah, so it to me feels like a very much in the middle of an Uber matching market and e-commerce, mostly because we get a lot of notice compared to Uber. When you hop on Uber, it's like, I need a ride right now. But for us, it's normally like, I need a nurse tomorrow, or I need a nurse in 3 days, or I need a nurse in 2 weeks. Sometimes we get, I need a nurse in 2 hours or 30 minutes or 30 minutes ago. But probably 60% of our business is 6-7 days or more in advance. And so there is kind of a window shopping element where nurses come in and see like, oh, what's available now? And, I'm going to plan for the future. And it's like we have inventory that we need to clear, kind of like e-commerce. But the inventory is very short-lived. So it reminds me a bit of Craigslist, or if I was like a produce section in a grocery store where I've got a bunch of bananas and they're going to be good for 3 days and then they're going to be bad and I'll have to get rid of them.
That makes sense.
There must also be an aspect of place that's interesting there, in the sense that the density, you might have many facilities in an area, but it's not the same as cars in a city, for example, I guess. But the advance notice aligns with that, so that you couldn't drive 2 hours with an hour's notice, but you can plan ahead. But density must play a role quite a bit in how you work and operate and optimize these kind of things.
Yes, and in that way, it's a little bit more like an Uber and less like an e-commerce. And if you go on Amazon or something, you can I can mail a book anywhere. That's a really great thing about, I just need 6 or 7 warehouses and that can kind of set me up nationwide. Whereas if you don't have a nursing home like within 30 minutes drive of where you are, or even less in some places, then you may as well have no inventory for me. Like you're no good to me as a nurse if you don't have shifts near me that are kind of match my schedule and my preferences. And so, yeah, it's a really difficult matchmaking. That influences a lot of where we recruit. And we're always looking at kind of the city level. How many nurses do we have that are engaged in the app? How many nurses do we have in the recruiting pipeline still uploading their documents and getting ready to work? And then how many facilities, how many shifts? And is there a good variety in the shifts between, your weekend shifts and your night shifts and your day shifts and other kind of flavors of shifts, if you will?
Are there specializations in that inventory that also affect the kind of opportunities or shifts that nursing professionals could take advantage of? So in other words, accreditation or specializations on the nurses side where you have to have, where that's another layer of complexity in the matching process?
Yes, absolutely. So the two big categories that we have are nurses and nursing assistants. And nursing assistants are more entry level. You might have some brief training of, a couple months. It's almost like a certificate. Whereas a nurse is more of like either an associate's degree or a 4-year degree. And within the nurse category, if you're like a LPN or an RN, for many shifts, that's interchangeable. Whereas the nursing assistants are pretty distinct. And the regulations get like even more interesting. And there is like nursing in general is just a highly regulated space. And so you may be a nurse, but you might not be allowed to give out medications, or you might not be able to, there's just certain functions that you need certification to do. We just this last week rolled out med techs or nursing assistants who are qualified to handle medications. And that's kind of like a new category that's between nursing assistants and nurses. But there are many others, like if you wanted to do, occupational therapy, or if you wanted to do, wound care or others, there's just like all sorts of different little niches. It's harder to make matches because those needs are, you just don't have a large volume of those needs. They're really kind of thin in lots of places. And so to get good, happy matching markets, you want kind of like a lot of people on both sides. And that's a little bit harder to do with some of the more specialized needs that we might be able to help out with.
Yeah, interesting. It reminds me of it. We had a recent conversation with a sneaker marketplace, so very different. And he made the observation, which I had never thought about, which is that especially in a used marketplace, you have a population and you don't just have one object like a phone, which anyone can use, but you have a shoe size. And so you need supply. And if you have just size 8, right, then you're not going to have the availability for your population. And so I think it's interesting as you add specializations or you run into this matching problem that makes it difficult to scale of okay, I can add this function to my app, but now I need to also have the matching professional population. So a lot of implications there. I want to dive in now and into something I find really interesting. And one of the reasons we were excited to chat about you, you're a VP of data science at IntelyCare, but your background is, your background is in economics. And I've spent most of my career in data science, and I've noticed this a lot of time in the US, a lot of time in Asia, last 10 years in Asia. And I've noticed a thing about data science teams that are heavily populated by computer science and mathematics backgrounds versus data scientists that come from fields like economics or cognitive science or other computational social science fields. And I'm curious what your thoughts there, or what do you think economics and behavioral science have to offer data science for a mobile app for solving the kind of problems that you solve? And what are some sample differences you think there between the conceptual tools of economics versus computer science?
It's a really good question. And I've worked with many, physics PhDs who turned into data scientists, or many of the people that you've described. And also many, more economists or statisticians. There's great things that both sides offer. And before I answer that question, I'll just say you want both on your team. And when we're building our team here, we try and get, the computer scientist profile, the kind of builder profile, with more of the analyst, kind of statistician who learned to code, sitting next to the coder who learned statistics, and they tend to make good teams. But as far as like what they each bring, I think that economics is really helpful when you're dealing with people, and behavioral economics in particular is great when you're dealing with people. And when you're trying to, as many apps are, trying to influence people, where either I'm trying to get you to maybe buy something or request a ride, or there's some behavior that I'm trying to draw out from my users. And there's not always like a clean data trail that's going to lead you to how you can influence a person. And that's where I think economics and behavioral science can offer. What we have in those disciplines is just some well-traveled roads and patterns of how people think and how people make decisions that can help you reduce the product space that you need to experiment over to find a good product that draws out the behaviors that you want. If you had a machine that could experiment all of the things and try out every possible message, or every possible price, or every possible variation of the product, then you might not need an economist on your team. Like you'd need a ton of users, and you might need 100 years, but you would eventually kind of reach out to that optimal solution where you're drawing out those behaviors in a really effective way. And your machine learning algorithms can figure that out. They'll find where that kind of optimal product experience is to draw out whatever behaviors that you're trying to do. But most apps aren't like that. They're not like an infinite experimentation machine, and you're kind of limited. And I might be able to run a handful of big A/B tests in a year if I have like a good engineering team. And so I have to make some choices. Like I can only try out 4 things. What things should I try out? And economics and behavioral science can help you come up with a smaller set of options that are more likely to be promising. It's not a guarantee, though. We're surprised all the time with what we find.
Can I dive a little
like
deeper?
that. It's an emphasis on the prioritization and the ability to decide what to try to solve using the patterns that the field has developed over time. Got it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Do you mind if I dive a little deeper on one specific experiment that you've run recently?
Yeah, for sure.
This kind of ties in because talking about supply and availability, and you have to maintain a supply of nursing staff, obviously, to fill the roles that pop up and things like that. So I see that you've recently done some experimentation around referrals. Would you mind diving into that a little bit?
Yeah, and I'll kind of give you a comparison and contrast. So we have done some experiments around referrals, and referrals is one of these product experiences. There's a behavior I want to draw out, and that I want to get people to refer their friends. There's a zillion different things that you could try. Like, how much do you offer somebody? Do you offer, a match, and I say, all right, you get $10 and someone else gets $10? Or do I give you a referral just for, one shift or for your fifth shift or your 10th shift or your 100th shift. There's just like a really big space to explore of different configurations of referrals. Mm-hmm. And so when we're faced with this type of problem, we lean on our behavioral science and we say, all right, we know that people like immediate gratification often. You could call this present bias or time discounted preferences. There's a lot of names for it, but basically, if I can give you a incentive right now, that has more like the magnetic pull of that is stronger if it's immediate. And if it's like, hey, if you do this thing, the next year you'll get this cool reward. That's like the magnets are farther apart from each other. There's just less pull from that type of incentive. Mm. And so we did an experiment with referrals to see if that was present within our users. And so we had one referral where we offered, you give us a referral, and when your friend works, we'll give you $100. And the other group, we kind of randomly assigned people to different groups. We said, all right, if you refer your friend, we'll give you $1 an hour on your next shift extra, just for your friend to apply. Your friend doesn't have to like upload all their documents. They don't have to work. We just want the lead, and then count on our recruiting team to kind of pull those people through. But you get paid right away. You don't have to wait. Like you could get paid tomorrow for referring your friend. Whereas if you have to wait for your friend to work, it could be several months before you get any sort of reward. And the results were pretty striking in that, yeah, people wanted that $1 an hour extra on their next shift, like incredibly more than $100 when their friend works. And just that, like that bird in hand, I can get you that $1 an hour really easily is just better than, some bird that you might get later. The analogy is breaking down quickly with that. But this, yeah, if I can get you something right away, it's good. But so that was like one experience where behavioral science was really helpful. We had something else interesting happen through COVID where we had a different product, which was just our pricing algorithm. And in pricing, it's possible to just have an experimentation machine that basically covers everything, where it's like, I can randomize over different prices and find out which ones are best and then kind of price right there, but experiment a little bit on other prices and kind of like move prices up if I feel like that needs to happen. And that's what we do. So we have what's called the bandit model for pricing. And so you might have 90% of shifts priced at what we think is the optimal price, but then the other 10% are kind of like a little bit higher or a little bit lower. And we, in doing this, building this kind of experimentation machine, have thrown out a lot of economic theory. We've kind of just said we don't need no thinking economics because like the machine is going to figure it out, and it works, and it's worked really well for us because we cover the universe of possibilities. Like it's a very small space to explore. Like your price can either be $20 or $21 or $22 or $23. And like, that's really all there is to it. There's not a lot of additional space to explore. And that machine has figured out subtleties in pricing that have surprised even us, where it's like, hey, these are some shifts that you didn't really know about, or it's picking up on some user behavior that we weren't aware of. And it's pricing in response or in anticipation even of those other actions that might happen later, and gives us a better outcome than we might have achieved otherwise.
So pricing teaches you more than pricing?
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just saying, so the pricing is teaching you more than pricing then? Like the pricing experiment?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it's kind of called, like, there's certain user segments that we didn't think were really important, or we just thought, everyone's wearing a size shoe 8, and now it's like kind of figuring out, oh, these people are wearing size 9 and trying to give them that kind of size 9 experience. So not really personalizing prices because everyone sees the same prices, but like picking up on little differences between markets that we would not have noticed.
Cool.
Contextualizing it. The work that I'm hearing, though, which is sort of behind the scenes, but I think is actually quite key, is being able to diagnose the structural elements of the problem that allow you to identify where you need to kind of have strong priors or set up hypotheses versus where you can push that responsibility into the machine, right? Knowing what the volume is or the frequency or the feedback loop where something like a bandit can work. And I think that's a lot of work that comes from prior pattern recognition and training that is below the surface, isn't necessarily seen.
Yeah, no, and you're right. Pricing works because we have like a lot of volume and our catalog is very narrow. And so for bandit pricing, as we do, it works out really well. But you probably couldn't get away with that if you had like a zillion things in a catalog and you're trying to like bandit price each one. Like that would just get really confusing and chaotic. And you might not have enough data on page 2 or 3 of your catalog to get good signal. And that might be a little bit more like our referral program. We got a lot more referrals when we started offering these incentives, but we don't have like gazillions of referrals coming in every day where we can like experiment today and inform what the referral experience is tomorrow. And there's also just like marketing and communication and rules in explaining a product like that where you just don't want to like change it all the time.
Yes, a lot of context. So speaking of that aspect, because part of the diagnosis of what's feasible, what kind of methods can be used, what's the structure of the problem that data lends itself to or machine learning lends itself to. What's your view of the relationship between a marketing team and a data science team for a mobile app like IntelyCare? Because it sounds like there's a lot of it goes beyond just have a request come to you and you implement it. It sounds like there's a lot of feedback loop in terms of actually this is what we can do, or, this is the kind of insight we can provide that a marketing team may not have realized. They came with a request and you kind of moved it adjacent to sort of say, this is feasible. And did you realize you could also learn this? But, tell us what's your view of how that relationship works?
So I think it can work it can take a lot of forms, but I think at the very basic level, there's a lot of data in marketing, and a lot of it is kind of nonsense. I'll be opinionated and controversial in that way, where there's just like a lot of marketing data that is interesting but not really helpful, and in many ways I think could even be a distraction and kind of a detriment to understanding what really works. And it reminds me a bit, there's all these studies that will show like, hey, if you have like an abstract in a paper and it's nonsense and you put an equation in it, then people think it's more legitimate because they just, I don't know, it has that like aura of credibility. And I think data can do that. And there's a lot of data in marketing. And so if I like throw you a dashboard that says, hey, this is what you spent, and these are all the people that applied, it's easy to just think, oh, well, therefore, like this caused that. And it's just really easy to kind of draw lines between what we did and what happened and assume causal relationships that aren't really there. And the data just makes it easy to follow.
As humans, we're good at telling stories, and I think marketers especially are good at telling stories.
Yes, exactly. Well, and marketers are also getting paid to believe that story. And so it's kind of like a death trap that we can all fall into together.
I feel attacked.
Yeah. Sorry, Jane. That's and it really just comes down to this, like, correlation is not causation. And it's really easy to infer correlations in the marketing data, but it's really hard to get causation because we don't often pose marketers with the question, what would happen if you hadn't done this? And a lot of marketing agencies especially are just not used to thinking in that way. And so the example that is sticking with me recently is I work in an office many days, and there's like bathrooms in the middle, and I am tempted to just like put signs up all around the office that say like, hey, the bathroom is this way, or like, did you know the bathroom is here? Don't miss out, the bathroom is here, and just like kind of market the bathroom experience. And then I could take credit for it and be like, hey, look, all these people use the bathroom and all these people saw my signs. Therefore, I, the marketing agency, am going to like take credit for all this behavior because I know you saw my signs, and then I know that you use the bathrooms later. So I'm in good shape. But it's just nonsense. Like, you would never believe that the signs like made people use the bathroom more. Like, it's not a thing. I can.
Yes. Okay, so it sounds like there's an element of trusted advisor role here in terms of helping folks not be led astray by data.
Yes.
Yeah.
So there is. Yeah, there's like, you're walking through a field with landmines, which is like sneaky patterns in data, and you gotta, somebody can help you navigate that. And that's not to say that like data scientists are smarter than marketers. And like, I go into marketing meetings and sometimes I have no idea what people are talking about. There's like so much like nuance and machinery, and like, did you know that there's a cookie that's like doing this thing? And you know, where your data, the data trail is very complex in marketing. And so to kind of wrap your head around that is hard to do. So it's not like data scientists are the only people that can be smart.
Yeah, it's crazy how much I've learned in the last 2 years from marketers. And it's similar to what you were saying earlier, that you see enough patterns over time that it helps you adjust your priorities. And where I would want to tackle it with data every time, they're just, well, we know this enough. We've done this enough times to know that it doesn't really make sense to approach that there. So I think that resonates completely with me. But having gotten to know you a bit, I know there's a creative element there as well, which I just want to tap into just a bit, right? So it's not just like, this is what data can do, or, you can't necessarily make that inference, but actually creatively bringing ideas to marketing. And tell me a little bit about that, because that's,
sure.
I think that's,
well, and so this is where, and marketing has kind of latched on to this piece, I think, a little bit better with what personalization can bring to marketing. And if I were a shoe store and I were, selling, size 8 shoes and size 9 shoes, like, I want to advertise those shoe sizes to the right people. And this is an analogy, so bear with me, but like, if that's your product, that's like a pretty obvious level of personalization to offer. But in other apps, it's not so obvious. And you might have like a size 8 app experience, whatever your app is, and you're trying to like market it broadly. Then a data scientist, economist, somebody says like, hey, you got to do an A/B test. Let's compare size 9 with size 8. And size 9 might win because 60% of the people out there are size 9. And then you're like, great, now we just do all size 9. And you're like, we like, you completely missed it. You just like switched the people that you were marketing to. What you want to be able to do is like, all right, if you're size 9, here's size 9. And if you're size 8, here's size 8. And if you're size 13, XL, whatever, then like, we got something for you too. And so iterating and exploring over the creative space and trying to find matches, that's like something that marketing plus data science does really well at. And to bring that into your app, I think, is also important. So like, certainly your marketing team and the ads and what, the words and the pictures and the offers are all important to like optimize at the person level as much as you can. but I would recommend trying to bring that same line of thinking into the app experience itself as much as you can, or as much as it makes sense.
That's good. I think about being comfortable in abstraction is an important part of marketing, and you as well, because marketing is supposed to be creative. And sometimes, to your point, we get distracted by the numbers sometimes and lose the sense of creativity. So it's very cool that you're bringing some of that creativity back into marketing and not just being the voice of data. Because again, you have to stay kind of a level above. So we won't pick on marketing for much more. But I was curious, and this is helping me as well. What's the most important lesson that you wish all app marketers would learn?
I think what I would say is that the question is, what would happen if I didn't show these ads? And if you can answer that question, which is a really difficult question, then you can infer your attribution model, your actual return on investment, and a lot of these metrics that are kind of like offered in your marketing dashboards, but could be misleading in your marketing dashboards. Mm-hmm. Basically, that is the one question. And if you can't answer that one question, then like you need to figure that out. What would happen if I didn't show these ads? And if you can get that, everything else, like you can throw away half of the other metrics that you have and live a perfectly good life and get much more out of whatever your marketing budget is, because marketers are going to spend whatever budget you give them. Yeah. And so like, if you can like really understand this, then you can figure out what that budget should be and where am I starting to experience diminishing returns on my marketing budget. And, you know, if I would be getting this much for free through digital ads, then maybe there's something else I need to try instead, and can kind of like force you into a better line of thinking than just thinking, oh, I'm just going to keep handing money over to my marketing agency. And
I think, sorry, I was going to say, I think we've seen that too in some where we talk to some apps and they're like, we send 4 push notifications a day. And you're like, why? And they're like, cause. And you're like, yeah, but why? Yeah. Right. So we've demonstrated with some that we send less and get a higher click through, again, because of that experimentation and of trying less. You'd never know if you didn't. And then also because of user preferences that we've also kind of talked about. I'll drop something in the show notes, but there is a great study about running blank ads, which you should look up just because have you seen it?
Yeah. I'm familiar with a line of research called ghost ads. I don't know if that's the same thing that you're speaking of.
I'll have to look. This one's a little obscure, but I think people just legitimately ran blank ads. So they bought a banner ad and ran nothing. And they proved that they might have gotten more clicks on a blank ad than an ad that actually had stuff on it. So this is the same kind of line of thinking as ghost ads. If you Google ghost ads, you'll probably see some of these things. And what some of these researchers will like do a public service announcement type ad or something like that. You somehow need to know you need to put a cookie on somebody that you didn't show an ad to. And that's what these like blank ads will do is kind of give you a way to track this user behavior. And that's kind of hard to do given the current digital marketing landscape. Like I can't throw up an ad for my competitors and like, you know, which is what I would be really interested in doing. Like you just can't do that. And so you have to find some other kind of placeholder or control group for your advertising experience.
Thinking about counterfactuals, I think is useful and important for everyone. I would actually recommend think of that one for a lot of product teams I've worked with as well. Is what will people do if that feature was not there, or how would their behavior change if that feature wasn't there? So I think that's very key. A related question to this. We often talk to growth or marketer or business folks about the kind of metrics they choose, and obviously data scientists have a more nuance because metrics are your job. How do you think about key user behavior metrics and choosing them, and kind of going up and down that granularity and specificity funnel.
Yeah, I think so. It's hard is I think the real answer, and it's different for every business, but where I cringe sometimes is when I see a dashboard that has just like so many charts on it, and you're scrolling for days to like get to the bottom of it, and if there's more than, I don't know, maybe 10 charts on your dashboard, then I would encourage you or whoever to think very carefully about like, do I really need this metric, or what are the metrics that matter, and be, at least in a dashboard setting, a little bit more focused and curated on a small number of metrics. And then maybe you have like a secondary page or a drill down or something that can like give you more detail later. But I think that kind of default to crazy detail can be, can create kind of a confusing or a bad experience. You're just not sure what to focus on. Now, choosing your 10 charts is really difficult. And I think that's kind of where your question is like, how do I choose those like top 10 charts that I focus everyone on? And I don't have like a really good mantra or philosophy. I think what we do generally, and what I've done elsewhere, is like, you just start at the where your business happens and kind of work up from there. And so like, who is making a purchase, or who is requesting a nurse, or which nurses are accepting a given shift. And like, that's kind of like where the matches are happening. That's where our business is happening. And then you maybe go up a level from there and say, all right, what are the most important, maybe 2 ingredients into making these matches? And I need requests from facilities, and I need nurses looking in the app. And so then there might be another layer to go up above there, but that might be good for like a Monday morning executive level dashboard. You say, all right, these are the nurses in the app, these are the shifts that were requested, and these are the matches that were made. And then there might be some other, questions that might come from that. You might say, all right, well, did somebody cancel a shift, or did somebody, I don't know. I guess they would then look at like, well, what are potential complaints or problems, or where can things go wrong? And then have some visibility into those as well. But if you're more than like 2 steps away from where the business happens, like that should be on someone else's dashboard. That shouldn't be on your like CEO dashboard. Or it should just be on a different dashboard that's kind of like specialized for that particular topic or subject. But if you try and like boil the ocean with your dashboard, then 1, it's slow, and 2, it doesn't, it's just hard to really understand quickly looking at it how things are doing.
Sort of saying choosing your optimization function, what are you optimizing for, is hard, is a very reasonable and answer that's worthy of lots of thought, I think.
Yeah.
And that alone is a great answer. It sounds like you're also saying that part of the problem of having lots of metrics is that you lose the context of any of those single metrics, the context around those metrics, because you're looking at 10 at once. And so you're forced to a level of generality. It's not just that there's a lot of them, but like a lot of them reduces the specificity of understanding the context around each one. I think that the dimension I'd love to throw in there is time, and ask the question, how much do we need one metric forever? Like, when we're choosing those 2 metrics to focus on, how much do those need to exist across time and be the golden metric, the key KPI permanently?
Yeah, I think it's a fair question. And I think the easy answer is like, well, you want it going back as far as you can because you need more context. But IntelyCare this year is entirely different than IntelyCare 2 years ago. And another example, related to maybe like the news is inflation and your consumer price index. And like, if you read into how that's calculated, you have like a basket of goods that changes over time. And some people will roll that back like 200 years and be like, hey, if you had a nickel in the Civil War, like it would be worth $1 bajillion today. And it's like, what were you buying with a nickel back in the 1800s? It's like, your basket back then was like bushels of grain or something, and nobody is using their nickels to buy that today. And so in some ways, like, it's great that you can tie that history back, but it's also kind of nonsense to compare, you know, a price index today with, you know, anything related to prices 200 years ago. Like that, there should be a shelf life on that. But
yeah, your business has changed so that we call these exogenous variables, but a lot of times we have our data that's in our database that represents our business, some processes that are relatively constant over time, but not even internally that constant because you've added features, you've added new product lines, but then the world itself and your competition has changed. And so that the desire for comparison across time and continuity is maybe a misleading one.
It's really, it's natural to want it forever. And the metric itself might not be bad. Like it could still be a good metric. It just might not be fair to compare it, you know, to your business a year or two ago. So like having some kind of default window and saying like, hey, this is where we were 6 months ago. If you look further back, then that's not super helpful. But that's also just like, you might lose a lot of boardroom meetings on that hill, if that's the hill that you want to die on. I agree that it is possibly true, but I don't know many people that would like immediately fall in line behind that line of thinking as well.
Well, let's throw another dimension in there because we talked about earlier. So we talked about time, but we have localization. And so, you know, you obviously have, I would imagine, like the New York metropolitan area for nursing facilities is going to operate very differently than northern New Hampshire or even like the suburbs of Boston. And so when you think about your models, your metrics, your recommenders, just tell us a little bit about the element of localization and to what degree is interlocation comparison feasible, useful?
Yeah, it's really important for us, and our markets are very different, and we'll have recruiters tell us about, you know, hey, we're going into some new market. People there are just so different. And we're like, hey, we have shifts. And then they talk to the nurses and they're like, no, there are no shifts near me. And they're like, yeah, there are. And they like go back and forth and realize that in this state, what is nearby is like entirely different than, rural Pennsylvania and Salt Lake City. In one place, people are really happy to drive 30 minutes and it's no big deal. Another place, if it's not like 15 minutes or less, then it's not close by. And so you might have some metric that tells you you're doing great in one of these markets, but you're not because people there are just different, or, you know, the layout of the town, the ease with which people can get to work is really different. So yes, there is a lot of variance across our cities and markets, but we still rely on some comparison across markets, and we do our best when we're running experiments to be like, all right, hey, we're going to launch a product in these 5 markets. And if you add up these 5 markets, they look pretty similar to these other 5 markets that we're not going to roll this product out. And it's not perfect, but if you get good representation and you have some new markets and some rural markets and some urban markets, when you're releasing your product, then you have a better idea if it's going to scale or not, because you just get that representation. And it's maybe easier to do it when you're dealing with people, and you can make sure, you know, I got some old people, some young people, some tall people, some short people, and you can like build a representative sample that way. With markets, you have a smaller number of them. It's a little bit harder to do, but you do the best that you can to see what spectrums exist and kind of sample across the spectrum to get representation.
Fair enough. All right, so let's circle back then, because I think there's a lot of you're referring to a lot of hidden complexity that you just need to hide or ignore to come up with answers. And so we talked early on. You referred to this concept of prioritizing, where what is a tractable problem, or what is a good hypothesis to start with, because you just don't have the time or data to explore the full solution space. So a lot of folks from across the business probably come to you with ideas, opportunities to exploit data. Yep. And from a data science perspective, and as the leader there, how do you evaluate those opportunities and prioritize? Again, hard. It's hard is a totally acceptable answer.
So I don't want to give away all my secrets, but a lot of ideas will come, and you put it on a list and you just kind of let it sit there for a while and see if it's still an important question in a week, or do you still want this feature in a week? And there are many favors, questions, ideas that come to us where if you just kind of let it sit for a few days, you kind of bring it up later or visit it later, and they're like, yeah, I don't think I actually need that. Or we figured out something else and it wasn't actually that important. And so I guess that's kind of like our filter of just like, is it really important or is it just a nice to have? Is by just like letting it sit for a few days. And if it can wait, and if it's still important, then great. We're still talking about it kind of at the next meeting, then great. Otherwise, you just kind of chase every shiny object and it's not sure like what was a mirage or what was real. And if it's real, it's still going to be there in a few days. I think the other thing that we look at is just when you're coming up with like a list of experiments, you want to run a lot of experiments. And that's something that we keep track of on our team, is just how many experiments are we running. Not because experiments are, inherently valuable, but it just helps us make sure that, we're cruising along and doing good. Like our process is good. But
you're practicing what you preach, because the experiment is about the counterfactual.
Yeah.
Your biggest lesson for marketers was what would happen if you didn't. Running the experiment helps you answer that question.
You gotta make it easy for people to find out that counterfactuals. And if I can give you one counterfactual a year, then you might fire me and hire someone else. So you want to run a lot of experiments, but it's also really easy to get into this just like a tiny step away from where I am. And if all I do are these like little tiny experiments, and I'm not like actually covering the product space, then sure, I might get like some small wins. And I spend a lot of time and energy running like 100 experiments, but they're all just like these little tiny wins, and some of them aren't wins at all. And you're I don't know, you just might not come away with any real big wins at the end. You might find if your experiments are bigger, instead of saying like, hey, do I need to do size 8 or size 9 shoes? Maybe instead your experiment should be like, maybe I shouldn't sell shoes. Maybe I should sell purses instead, or something. Like if there's like some bigger experiment that can help you cover more of the product space or experience space, that's a trade-off, and it's an important one. So you want like lots of experiments, but if all you do are these tiny ones, you should probably like get rid of some of those and go big. Make sure that you have some big
step change. So you're using some kind of expected value framework or thing where you're kind of saying like, here's some possible estimate of the impact size, and then you're kind of having some combination of quick and easy, smaller experiments that allow you to move fast and iterate, while also not getting lost in that optimization of shades of blue, and doing bigger things that can have a larger impact, even though they may be a little more costly to run.
Yeah. And you are limited in many ways by what your engineering team is able to support in terms of those big experiments. And that's why you probably can't have like a zillion of those, and not every experiment can be big. You can also confuse your customers a lot if your experiments are like really too big and crazy. But if you can be really thoughtful in building whatever kind of infrastructure or framework, and if it's really easy for you to slip in a purse in your shoe store and see what people, do people go for it, then that's pretty cool. Like, that's a pretty big experiment and it doesn't cost you a lot. And that's like, go for it if you can find those experiments.
That's awesome. I think there's two things I've taken away from the conversation today. One is IntelyCare is going to start selling shoes, which was news to me, but that's good to know.
Yes.
No, I read there was a Richard Branson book. He was talking about setting up Virgin Records, and he's like, Starbucks was new at the time. And what I've learned is, instead of giving out free coffee and charging for the records, I should have charged for the coffee and given out free records. So he should have used your experimentation, and then maybe he could have taken over Starbucks. We'd have Virgin coffee. But the second biggest thing I've taken away is now I understand why all of my requests to the data science team never get done. So I appreciate that insight about the list and things on the list. And I think what you told me is, as a marketing person, I should be more persistent to make sure I keep asking about the same thing week after week, right?
Ask a couple times, give it a couple day or two. And yeah, if it's still important to you and you have some nice data scientist friends, then they'll accommodate. But I mean, it's a lot. Like, when you give someone a dashboard, there's that kid's book. If you give a mouse a cookie, then they'll ask you for something else. And that's very much our experience as data scientists is like, if you give a CEO a chart, then she's going to ask you for something else. And then like, there's just kind of always more questions to ask when you are presented with data information. And so, yeah, at some point you have to kind of figure out what's most important, and waiting a few days is
from the marketing side, it's amazing because we don't often have the insight into what you can actually pull data on. So one source of the additional questions that come to you and the additional requests, I know for a factor, because I'll have somebody pull this data just off the cuff. Oh, look, I just have this. And you're like, oh, you have that? Like, you were able to get that? Like, oh, this opens up so many possibilities, right? So that's the problem. You shouldn't show us in the first place. I think that's what it comes down to. No, I think, so I like asking just general question to wrap it up. You have a ton of great experience, on the data science front. And so if I could ask you something very generic, and if you don't have an answer, that's okay. But what, through this experience, especially with IntelyCare, but along your journey, has been kind of your biggest insight or the most interesting thing that you've kind of come across in your experience with, economics into behavioral science, into data science?
So I actually didn't know anything about behavioral science before starting it in IntelyCare. And it was, so that is something that I've picked up here and just read everything that I could on the subject, because in dealing with people this directly, I think what I learned is that people are weird. And it's not always easy. Like, hey, if I give you $10, will you do this? If I give you $20, will you do it twice? And that those linear patterns that you often see in economics, or is just kind of your default assumption in business, can often break down. And sometimes it's more about what you say or how you say it instead of what you say, or the timing of your referral bonus instead of the size. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, I guess that's my 3-word answer to your question, is that people are weird. And so you need to experiment to like really understand people. It's not as predictable as you might think.
Yeah. I like it. We could do behavioral science all day. My favorite thing is if instead of $5, if you spend $5 on flowers and someone invites you for dinner and you hand them $5 flowers, oh, thank you. They put it in the vase and that's great. If somebody invites you over for dinner and you hand them $5,
yeah, it's weird.
Total weird. You totally kill the mood.
I can't take this. Yeah.
Yeah, you're like, it's the same thing. It's the same value, right? So anyway, that's one of my simple ones, but an illustration that I very much enjoyed, because to your point with referral bonuses, I mean, everyone speaks money, but it's also interesting sometimes when you offer like a gift to someone as opposed to a monetary gift. The monetary gift, sometimes people are very standout. And you guys are healthcare space, which might make monetary even more interesting. But
yeah.
But cool. Awesome. Thank you so much for your time, Ben. Thank you so much for joining us. It was incredibly insightful. If there's any nurses for nursing homes listening, feel free to check out IntelyCare. But yeah, we really appreciate your time. We're going to put this up on everywhere that podcasts are sold. So feel free to tune in, and we'll talk to you all next week.
Thank you very much.